Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 7 of the Heartbeats of Adapted PE podcast. My name is Jen Hebank, and I'll be your host. I am the 2022 Shape America National Adapted PE Teacher of the Year. Welcome to our podcast. And I'm excited to bring you our guests today. But first, I want to share about our mission and vision for this podcast. We are a podcast that aims to inspire, connect, and amplify adapted PE teacher voices and those who support all students. So we invite all our friends who just need some support, and we're here to learn. I'm here to learn. I selfishly started this podcast because I want to connect with people and I want to get better at my job. And so that's why we're here. And our vision is to celebrate both the heart and the beat of our essential field, the heart being the storytelling. And when I bring our guests on, I always say, this is a big comfy couch in the middle of the living room. We're sitting together having a conversation about how we can support all students. And the beat, which is the daily rhythm, the things that we do every day that help us support all students in our essential field. So when you put it together, you get the heartbeat of Adapted PE podcast. We are a not-for-profit podcast that will be released about one time per month. And because we're busy teachers and our guests are also busy, we don't have like a consistent day that we release on. So we might be at the beginning of the month, one month, and at the end of the month, the next, because again, teacher schedules are busy. So look for us one time per month. And this podcast is brought to you this whole podcast year by Fit and Fun Playscapes. Pam over at Fit and Fun has been so generous, and she actually made an appearance on our podcast early on, but you can find them on X at Fit and Fun Play. So thank you, Pam and Fit and Fun, for supporting us for this 2025-2026 podcast year. Today's guest, I'm going to bring him on in a second, but I want to share a little bit about him. I am so lucky. I've been wanting to have him on our podcast since the beginning, but his name is Bryden Carlson-Giving, and I just feel so lucky to have our guest, Bryden, on our show. He is a neurodivergent and disabled occupational therapist, and he is my colleague with extensive experience in pediatric outpatient, inpatient, and school-based settings. He has been in our district now. He just started this fall. He's going to share a little bit more about that in a little bit. But I love his research. I love that he's passionate about the things that he's passionate about. And we're going to get into some of his frameworks and his models for how he not only approaches his sessions with his kids, but also is kind of like making me think and our colleagues think about the way that we approach our sessions and our backgrounds and bias when working with our kids. And what's so cool about Bryden, he is passionate about the research, but he's also passionate about sharing it. And he received the 2024 Emerging Leader Award from Boston University, which is where he did his post-professional doctorate. He is brilliant. And he titled his book that he's just finishing up that will be released in April 2026. It's called Neurodiversity Affirming Occupational Therapy, Empowering Approaches to Foster Neurodivergent Participation. So I'm going to bring him onto our podcast now. Bryden.
Hello. Hi. Good morning.
Hi. And I just have to say, when I was just bringing this podcast together and just all the ideas, I asked Bryden to potentially like make a graphic, and I didn't really know what I was asking for. But Bryden, you made this beautiful graphic, and it's like so me. And every time I look at it, I'm like, it's just so good. So we've been using your graphic, and it is just beautiful and just describes everything about this podcast within the artwork. So thank you so much for doing
it's not mine, it's yours.
I love it. Thank you so much. So Bryden, tell us briefly about your background and how long you have been in OT.
Yes. Oh my gosh. When I was even kind of thinking about how long I've been in OT, it kind of starts to blur together over the course of time. I've been in OT, oh my gosh, about 8. I think this is my 8th year now. I first started out more in outpatient, inpatient peds. So a lot of that work was with mHealth Fairview. So Masonic Children's Hospital and the outpatient clinics through mHealth Fairview. So a lot of my work was a mixture of outpatient piece, but also in the pediatric ICU and the bone marrow transplant floor and all that, until I entered the schools in 2024. And then now, ever since I've entered the schools, yeah, I don't know. Unless I ever enter full-time academia, I don't think I'll ever leave. I don't know. I love the schools. I love the multi-systems. Like, you can't just like work with a student and not address the systems of the school. So I love that component.
I love it. It's like an added little bonus to, I don't know, like it hits in the spot where I feel like a lot of us are gaining passion, and like you're going to be leading us through a lot of like things that we're trying to change about the system. So I just thank you in advance for that. We have a lot of future professionals and people who listen across the country who are unfamiliar with occupational therapy. So would you just describe and define your job to our friends who maybe are less familiar?
Totally. Yeah. So, contrary to maybe much of popular opinion, occupational therapy does not help prepare students to find jobs. Though a part of what OT can do is support participation in work. So occupation essentially means like any sort of meaningful activity that you occupy your time with, because we as human beings are occupational beings. We do various things throughout our day that give us meaning and fulfillment. And so that's our roles as parents, students. And so within occupational therapy, there's like a framework of 9. I like to think of them as like 9 encircling different different occupations of life. There's activities of daily living. So like bathing, dressing, eating. There's instrumental activities of daily living. So that's like you're managing your money, you're cooking. Then there's work, there's school, there's play and leisure, social participation, and rest and sleep. And so I always like to tell my school-based friends and colleagues, like the moment that a student gets onto that bus or they're on their way to school, from the moment that they get off the bus and leave school, anything that's kind of tricky throughout that day, there's a high chance that OT can help, because like OT in the schools, oftentimes we get kind of pigeonholed to work on fine motor, and that's like 1% of what we do. And for me, I really don't care how well a student can cut with the scissors. Like I care more about like their well-being at school, and do they feel accepted? Can they be their full authentic selves and regulate and all that stuff? But and what I really love about OT is that not only like do we address things that are really meaningful to the individual on their terms, but I think really where our bread and butter is, the magic happens, is that it's about looking at the environment and kind of assessing if there's any environmental barriers that are impacting that person's ability to participate in what they want to.
Yeah. I was thinking back because as an undergrad, I went to UW River Falls. Were you Eau Claire too? What was your undergrad? Remind me. Where were you at again? Gustavus. That's right. You have your hat on. I should have guessed.
Oh, you're just fine.
Perfect. So there was, when I first started learning about all the team members of an IEP team, I was so lucky to do a couple of my practicum hours, which I could have not. But there was this place in Hudson called the Special Children's Center. It's the Hudson Special Children's Center. And I did a few of my practicum hours working with PTs, OTs, speech. And that was my first kind of sight into what OTs do. And so I remember I think I was doing like spinning activities with a student, and I looked over and there was an OT just working on playing with Fisher-Price toys. And I was like, what is this cool thing that you get to teach kids how to be kids, you know? And so it was also my first kind of sight into like how we all work as a team. And I think that really added to my interview when I was going in, because I think that gets missed. Like, we are a part of a team, right? Mm-hmm. My next question for you is, was there like a moment where you decided like, yes, I'm going to be an OT? Like, what was that moment? What was that experience? Can you just share a little bit about that?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. It's like nothing, I will say there's like nothing super romantic about it. Like some people, when they enter their field that they're in, you know, for most of their lives, like, oh my God, like I experienced this accident or I helped save this person. And for me, it was like, so I actually, when I went to Gustavus, we'll go Gusties forever and always. I actually started off as a physics major because I was like, I want to be an astrophysicist and I love this area of science so much. But then first semester at Gustavus, so like their introduction of physics course, it's not really introduction of physics. It's like it's like all within
Oh,
like the lens of like astrophysics.
oh
And
my gosh.
my goal by the end of the semester was just to not fail. And then I just knew at that time that physics was not for me. But then I ended up really thinking about it, and I almost became a kindergarten teacher, but I really liked healthcare. I really liked like the systems of like navigating that. And
Mhm.
so I actually just typed into Google one day, like teaching plus healthcare, and like OT was like the first thing to pop up.
Oh, wow,
Um,
cool.
and when I started exploring what OTs can do, um, I became pretty sold, especially after shadowing like different OTs
Mhm.
in various settings. Like, yep, I think this is where I want to be.
That is so cool. Okay, it's funny that you said you wanted to be like a physicist because my husband is a physics teacher,
That's right.
and I can't remember if I told you this, but he is like a math whiz and like took thermodynamics for fun, and like I can't make it through physical science. Like
Yeah, like
I'm like the biology anatomy kid.
yeah.
Um,
And
it's just
I took Calc 2. I got an A on that in college. Like I loved like calculus. There's like there's many ways to find the one answer, and like that's okay. But I think
okay.
when it became more like abstract, it's kind of like in math when you get more into the word problems, it gets
Okay.
harder. And so like
Yeah.
applying the math to like astrophysics and like how the speed of a star changes depending on how far away or close it is to the sun. And oh my gosh, it was just too, it became less concrete for me and too abstract for my brain. I was like, yep, I got to get out of
Yeah.
here.
Sometimes our struggles direct us in the right direction, don't they? Like it's
Oh
hard
my
at the
gosh.
time, but then it just kind of redirects us to where we're supposed to be. Oh, that's funny. So I kind of want to get into like some of your topics here. What like first of all, you have an amazing network and you've connected with so many people. And I know like we're kind of on the same basis where like we feel like we have a really good network across the country and we present in different places. And I want to know like what are some of your favorite topics that you've presented on?
Yeah, the primary thing that I present on is a concept called neurodiversity. And so neurodiversity um, is the diversity of human minds. It really recognizes that the way that our brain, not even just our brain, but the way that we perceive and experience the world, there's like an infinite variation in how humans experience the world. And it's a biological fact you can't ignore. And a lot of people think that being neurodivergent is synonymous with autism and being an ADHDer, and that's not the case.
Mm.
Neurodiversity is like kind of like I like to think of it as like a multiverse, and there's like so many different ways to be neurodivergent. And so if you deviate from neurocognitive experiences from societal norms, you're neurodivergent. And so if some concrete examples are like a lot of the DSM diagnostic statistics manual, they're medical diagnoses like there's autism, there's ADHD, but it's also sensory processing differences. It's also our
Mm.
friends with Down syndrome. It's trauma. If you experience trauma, you're like that changes how you experience the world. You're likely neurodivergent. It's depression. It's anxiety. It's schizophrenia. So if you hear voices, that deviates from societal norms of what neurocognitive functioning should look like, so you're neurodivergent. And the whole point of this is like we like to think that the way to be a human, the way to experience the world should look like one or two or three different ways, and that's it.
Yeah.
Like one or three little boxes, but it's a multiverse of like different ways to do it. It's infinite, and we need to be essentially do a better job of recognizing how our different systems, whether it's in schools, it's in healthcare, how we actually through the assessment tools that we pick, through our intervention strategies, we actually perpetuate ableism in that way, and like
Mm-hmm.
um, and so I really like how, especially Nick Walker's work, he's incredible. But like neurodiversity, being neurodivergent, it's neither intrinsically positive or negative. Like we don't want to call
Yeah.
differences superpowers. Like it's gross and not super great either. But it's about recognizing that just like with human life, depending on the context, the activity, there's going to be strengths and there's going to be challenges, and it's just neutral. And it's just recognizing that neutrality of the human experience, if that makes sense. So um,
Absolutely.
that's a lot of what I do. And so I essentially take that concept of what neurodiversity is from these remarkable individuals, and essentially help teach other OTs how to not only be neurodiversity affirming when working with a neurodivergent person, but really actually engage in that critical reflexive work of, okay, like working with someone, and so like not doing hand over hand, not forcing eye contact is great, but what else can we do to help change the systems? Like look at your assessment tools. What can we do on a professional level to help our professional organizations be more supportive of this work? And so really engaging in that ableism within OT, if that makes sense.
It's amazing. I'm thinking through some of the things that you said and some of the things that are popping out. First of all, like when I went to school, so I graduated college in 2010. And I remember coming out of a couple of my classes and my professor saying, this is really gross. But like now, like back then it was like just the way we thought.
Totally.
But like when we are working with the sensory system, like you're supposed to figure out what's broken and fix it.
Mm-hmm.
Like how icky is that? We've come a long way in that. But sometimes like in other states, like we are still learning. We're on that journey, right? And so just thinking about some of those things that you said, like we come from a place, and I've learned a little bit too about like the medical model versus the social model of disability. And how like when I was growing up, and it kind of still is in the medical world, about how people are broken when they have a disability and we need to fix it. And it's really not like that. Like, and so the other space is learning about that environment. Like, so what about the environment is disabling to the student? What about that environment is disabling to that person with a disability? And when we approach it from that way, it really shifts our mindset to think about like all people are just unique and have their strengths and have their challenges. Can you say more about, because I know that you know a lot about this, would you be able to share more about like the medical model versus
oh my gosh, yeah model? So the medical model, and I want to give a little like preface for listeners, viewers, that when we're talking about the medical model of disability, we're not talking about a medical setting like a hospital, outpatient clinic. It's not a location of services. It's how we view disability. Like you'll hear people say the medical model and educational model. That's referencing settings and location of services and all that. Medical model of disability is a model of disablement where disability is viewed as a pathology. It's an incorrection of the human experience. It needs to be fixed. It's not okay to be disabled. You'll hear me use identity first language with disabled and disability, just because many of us that are disabled, being disabled is not a bad thing. It's not a bad word. It's a part of who we are as human beings, and we can't turn it off like a light switch. It's kind of like I'm queer. I don't have queerness. Like I don't have gayness. Like I'm a gay OT. Like you don't if that makes any sort of sense. So the medical model of disability views disability as a pathology that needs fixing, and we don't really think about how within OT, special education, especially special education, our healthcare services, like the medical model of disability is the way of viewing disability. Like look at our IEP goals. Oftentimes we're focusing on making someone more neurotypical, less neurodivergent through our IEP goals, and versus instead of really focusing on empowerment, self-efficacy, like their quality of life as a student in school. And so that's the medical model. You have the social model of disability, which really came out through the disability rights movement. And the social model of disability, as it was originally conceptualized by Mike Oliver, it's a better model than the medical model of disability, but it also is not perfect, because the social model of disability really recognized, because they were so focused on policy change and was really led by those with physical disabilities. The undertone was essentially that by fixing the environment, they're less disabled, which is true for many disabled individuals. But for myself, so I'm autistic and ADHD, and I also have depression. And so like what I like to share with people is, do you know what? You could remove all the environmental barriers in the world. So like societal attitudes, everything could be sensory inclusive, but there are still days where my depression makes it hard for me to get out of bed. Like my disability is disabling in and of itself. And so for anyone that's really interested in diving into models of disability and just frameworks, highly recommend like not stopping at the social model, but also looking into just the neurodiversity framework and the cultural model of disability.
Yeah.
Because for how we talk about disability in like North America or like Eurocentric cultures often doesn't resonate with clients and students and those that are of like that are outside of that culture, like indigenous cultures. Just like the way we even talk about disability doesn't even resonate with them. And so it's really complex, but the ultimate goal is, yes, the social model disability is better than the medical model. And we need to be far better at looking at how we're setting up students for failure by not looking at the environment and recognizing those biases within our systems.
Yes. Thank you. That was so good. I'm excited to get some feedback as people listen to that. And it's just really good the way that you explained that. So thank you so much for sharing that. Are there any other things that you presented on that you're passionate about, or is that kind of like your main thing that you do?
Yeah, that and like ableism and really shifting the focus. Actually, what I've been really focusing on right now is really shifting the focus of supporting OTs on recognizing or using our whole scope within the schools. Because kind of like what I mentioned earlier, we get so often pigeonholed into, oh, we're going to pull students out to work on fine motor skills for 20 minutes once a week. And maybe we'll help support with sensory accommodations and such. But gosh, we can do so much more than that. So like what I like to tell folks is that there are plenty of times for OTs where, yes, we want to pull a student to work on a skill, but the ultimate dream should be supporting their ability to participate with their peers in class and their general education peers, because students that receive SPED services are general education students first. Special education services, it's not a location, it's a service. And so I think we as OTs have unintentionally supported that framework. And so like for me, pulling a student to work on a skill for 20 minutes, like handwriting, cutting with the scissors, for me, I believe I can do far better with supporting that student's access to public education when I push into the classroom, I push into the resource room, and I help co-lead activities with the resource teacher or for the general education teacher and with their peers, because kids learn far better when they're with their peers. And also just modeling to also the adults, like, this is how you can do it in an affirming way. Like, this is how you can work on regulation in an affirming way. Like, you're going to get way more bang for your buck when you kind of go that route versus just kind of pulling a student, you know, for 20 minutes once a week to work on a silo skill in like in a closet or whatever space that you have to work on that skill.
Yeah. And I know, like, for adapted PE teachers, we still know that our kids learn best with general PE, but sometimes in order to hit on some needs that kids need, we do pull for 20 minutes or we do push in or we do consult, or like we have a whole framework of how we can address student needs. But I 100% have seen over the years, like, kids are motivated by other kids, right? Like they want to be with their peers. They want to participate in things that their peers are participating in. So I can totally see that. So I want to ask you, you know, coming from your pediatric inpatient, outpatient, do you feel like you've had to shift your mindset as far as like work as a team, like as an IEP team? Because we can collaborate, right? Adapted PE and OT can collaborate. So how is that like mind shift different from you? And then how does it feel like you've been able to support the team, or like we collaborate a little less because we're at the secondary level, but I feel like we're always available to each other, right? Yeah. Can you just share a little bit about that?
Yeah, when you're in the there's collaboration that exists at outpatient and inpatient, but I almost feel like it's not less urgent to collaborate. You know, you're less forced to collaborate compared to in the schools, and that's what I really like about being in the schools is, you know, the student works within a system and multiple systems. And what I really like about the IEP teams is that it's an opportunity for, this is actually why also I really love evals, because for me, it's an opportunity to help the team see the student differently. Like so what I love to like share information because oftentimes we kind of come in with this medical health disability lens when viewing the student and their needs.
Mhm.
And I love coming into the IEP team with like, well, actually, I've just spent some time with the student, or what if we thought about or viewed this behavior or this performance challenge through this lens?
Mhm.
And it's just always so fun for when you have like a IEP team member, when you do share that kind of difference in viewing the student. They're like, huh, oh my gosh, I've never thought about that. And it's just, it's like an exhale. I love it.
Yeah. Recently we were in a meeting together with a student, and you offered up a suggestion of how to figure out how the student likes specific things. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but like you said, to video different things in the
Oh,
school
yes.
and like make a video and then see what the student is stimming on, like what part of the video does she keep repeating. I'm like, that is so brilliant. All of us walked out. We're like, oh my gosh, like that's an amazing way to figure this out, because the student is very interested in videos, watches YouTube, and like will stim and rewatch things that she really loves, and then like it gets into her brain, and then she is able to script some of it. And we just walked out. We're like, that is such a great way to figure out what the student enjoys. And so like that collaboration piece for that specific meeting was so good for us. Like we have to think outside the box, right? And so I just appreciated that. And I know at the early childhood level and elementary level, our adapted PE teachers will often pull with the OTs, right? And they'll do like stations, or they'll do things at the same time together, and they really work kind of hand in hand with that student. At the secondary level, it's a lot more consulting. And we're always kind of just asking like, what are some suggestions that you have for this situation, or this student comes in and is having a hard time, like what would you suggest? Or we're like getting into a routine, sensory routine, like where do we even start, right? And so those are the pieces that I have really enjoyed and have made me better in looking in different ways outside the box too.
And I love that example too, because the medical health disability basically tells us that stimming is bad and we need to stop a student from stimming. Like, and we don't think about how, whether you're neurodivergent or not, we all stim as human beings. You're walking through a grocery store, you're humming a song that you love, that's stimming. You tapping your foot during a meeting, that's stimming. And it's just, we as a society, as a culture, have determined some ways, some forms of stimming as more socially appropriate than others. And so for many neurodivergent people, like stimming is really regulating. It's a sacred art, honestly. And so I always like to tell people, if like a student is stimming, stim with them, because then it's almost like a way of like you seeing them, and they feel heard and seen in that own way too.
I love that. There was also a meeting we were in, I think it was last year, where a student had a communication device, and the student like kept hitting the same button over and over and over. And you're like, he's stimming for joy. Like, think of it as like a stimming for joy piece. And we're like, oh, you know? And so it really, again, shifting your brain to like think of the more affirming pieces of communication, of joy. I thought that was a really great piece too that you shared too.
Cool.
I want to ask, because in my undergrad, I was so lucky to have a teacher who was very, very good at explaining the sensory system and talking about students with autism. You know, at the time it was less about neurodivergence and more about this student has a sensory system, blah, blah, blah. But can you just share how the sensory system would play into a student's experience, like in the gym, like in PE? Can you just kind of give us all the pieces? And then I want to ask more questions after about the sensory system in those pieces. Can you just go for that real quick?
Yeah. So we as human beings, we have 8 senses. And so, you know, you have your touch, your smell, your taste, hearing, all, you know, your 5 vision, like your 5 traditional senses. But then over the last 20 years, we've been better about talking our other 2 senses. So there's vestibular, which is like your movement and balance. And then there's proprioception, which is your body awareness in space. And then very recently, probably in the last decade, there's been more wonderful research and conversation around interoception, which is our eighth
That's a new
sense.
one.
Oh, have you heard of interoception
I have
before?
not. Can you explain that?
Oh my God. Okay,
I'm going to learn something today.
So interoception is your internal body awareness. And so this is like your body's ability to monitor internal cues like your heart rate, hunger, when you need to use the bathroom, when you're thirsty, like that's interoception. So your body's ability to kind of monitor those internal signals.
Okay.
And so you might see this for some students that like, I like plenty of students that maybe they're working on potty training and maybe, families, they have the students sit on the toilet for long periods of time or they become afraid of the toilet for some reason. And so they actually learn to teach themselves to almost desensitize or ignore their bowel and bladder until like, oh, it's too late. Like they have 2 seconds to run to the bathroom. Otherwise they're going to have an accident because their bowel and bladder has a muted perception of that sense. So like that communication from that organ to like their brain. Whereas some students are maybe hypersensitive to maybe how their heart rate is feeling. So for most human beings, like you don't consistently think about how hard your heart is beating when you're sitting at rest. For some students, for some individuals, it's like a hammer in their ears because they're hypersensitive to how their heart is beating in their chest. And these 8 senses, they're not just like 8 different floating boxes that work on their own. They're all connected. They're all complex, especially when it comes to vestibular, so like movement and balance, taste in your ear. Those 3 senses are often connected too. But so like there's like no right or wrong way to experience these 8 different senses. And so like even within OT, like still, even in some school districts, but especially in outpatient, we'll do a test on a student and maybe on this test, we score them, we compare them to non-disabled students, non-disabled peers, and it says, oh, they're hypersensitive to vestibular input. They're hypersensitive to any sort of movement. So we're going to basically kind of get them in a playful way. We're going to kind of force them to spin. We're going to force them to do all these things because we think that the way that they experience vestibular input is bad or wrong. And so we try to correct that sensory system. And so like that's a very medical mild disability view of it. Whereas if we view it from a neurodiversity affirming perspective, maybe that student is okay with not going on a swing. Like you can participate and function through life without playing on a swing. Like there is so much variability in how we participate in human beings. So when it comes to like gyms, I mean, gyms, even for myself as an adult, like I have my own sensory processing differences, like especially when it comes to noise and vision. Like even when it's cloudy, I always wear sunglasses. And those challenges though, like the hypersensitivity can present strengths as well. So like hearing, so like in a gym, gyms are oftentimes a mismatch for my own sensory system because of the bright fluorescent lights. I mean, for many people, like the lights are like fine, but for me, like they're like scathing. They're almost like the sun sometimes, especially if I'm in the gym for long periods of time. Noise, like the echoing and the distortion, it hecka intensifies for me. And so like, and that's just talking about 2 systems. We're not even talking about the smell of the bleachers or the smells of other students or the touching of having sweaty gym clothes on you. Maybe you're hypersensitive to tactile input. And so like the feeling of sweaty gym clothes is like super dysregulating. And like, oh, there's so many components, but I do really want to briefly touch on how there's strengths to these differences too. So like, yes, my hypersensitive to noise poses a challenge in gyms, hallways during transition time, especially at the high school. But because I'm hypersensitive to noise, I oftentimes hear really beautiful, complex, nuanced sounds in like nature that most people would miss. So like a simple walk with our dog is like a cacophony of beautiful different kinds of sounds. Like, and it's a lot of sounds that most people would probably miss. Or like when my husband and I are listening to a song, I'll be like, oh my gosh, like what do you think of that instrument or like that riff or whatever? I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about. Like, and he's a music teacher.
He can't hear it.
Yeah.
And you just have a little bit more like.
Yeah. Like I branch onto that stuff a little bit more with my ears. And so
interesting.
And like, if we spent more time less time trying to change how we think they should be experiencing sensory input, and instead working with a student. Hey, like, do you want to participate in gym? Great. Okay, how can we help? What are some accommodations or some tools that we can help explore with you that work for your body and your sensory system, and practice using those? So like loop earplugs are like life-changing in many instances, and sunglasses in gym are sometimes life-changing for many students. To a lot of people, like, oh, that looks silly, they're wearing sunglasses inside, but for them, like, that's participation, and that's beautiful, and that's okay.
Thinking back to like when I first started teaching adapted PE, like I would have kids in general PE who would literally stare at the clock that was counting down and like start plugging their ears excuse me, because they knew that when that clock was going to go down, the horn was going to go off. And if you can imagine, like, with all the sound differences and the way that you take in sound, like, it's very understandable that they would start to be afraid of that noise because it's so loud to begin with, but then, you know, plugging their ears. And so when I go present, I talk about how, like, we don't need to use the horn. We don't need to use the whistle, you know, like early on, like, obviously if we're outside, like, we need a whistle, get everybody in, but there are just different ways that we can get attention. I use music, even though that's still like a loud noise, but I feel like it's less, you know, harsh on the ears or whatever.
Less jarring.
And like maybe like we get into it a little bit. Like I know we move better when we have music most of the time, but I really, when I present, I talk about like, let's think differently about this, and help our students be able to be comfortable in our spaces, because again, it's that environmental piece rather than, you know, the thinking that this piece of their hearing is broken, right? If we can take away the loud, sensory, overwhelming pieces of that horn, that whistle, well, we're going to see less of, you know, the nervousness and the less of the running away. And so just thinking differently about those pieces has been really good for me. And I think it'll be good for anyone who's listening, who's kind of trying to learn a little bit. So thank you for sharing that. That was so good. So I want to continue here, and we're going to get into ableism. I'm so excited to talk about this. Yes. You created a framework and a toolkit to help OTs challenge ableism. Can you share more about the creation of that and how you navigate or teach it to others? Because I want to see if we can apply some of that to being adapted PE teachers too.
Totally. So the model, it's called the Empowering Neurodivergent Occupational Participation and Wellbeing Model, the Empower model. And so it was an outcome of my doctoral research through BU, and I have a website, neurodivergentnexus.com or neurodivergentot.com, and has like the visual there. But when you look at it, there's like these 4 foundations that are kind of like the pillars of the model. So there's strengths-based approaches, trauma-informed care, disability justice, and anti-racism. And then inside of the model is the anti-ableist occupational therapy process. So there's critical reflexivity. So before you even see the student, you have to engage and reflect in your own biases and your own privilege within this really complex system, and reflect on how you can be a better ally and recognize, you know, your privilege within the system and all that. Then you have inclusive evaluation. So like, even when you do a re-eval or an eval for a student, how can you assess their need areas in the most affirming way possible? And then there's affirming supports and services, neurodivergent outcomes. So then you are supporting the individual to be their most neurodivergent authentic self, not based off of norms, how little accommodations they need, but like, you're supporting their well-being as their most authentic selves. And then the final stage of the cycle, because for me, it's a constant cycle. It never stops. The final stage is advocacy. So like, what can you do within the school system to help combat ableism, essentially? And so like, when I think about like typically what I do is like I said, I love evals. And so one way of how I embed this system within evals is, so standardized assessment tools. I haven't used a standardized assessment tool in years. And I know different related service providers need to use different tools to qualify. For occupational therapy, pros and cons to being like a full-on related service is that we don't need to use standardized assessment tools, which is really wonderful, because for me, I could care less how more disabled a student is to their peers. I don't care
Yes.
like what their score is, because I'm not compare like they're never going to be not disabled. They're never going to be not neurodivergent. So why am I already setting them up for failure by comparing them to a neurotypical or disabled peer? And many of the skills, at least with occupational therapy in our standardized assessments, the skills are just like I don't care how fast a student can pick up coins in 1 minute and drop them in a cup. That's not, I don't
Right.
care about that. That tells me nothing about their well-being.
hundred
Um,
percent.
and so I oftentimes use assessment tools that don't focus on norms, but instead really harness the student's voice. Because when I came into the schools, I was really surprised to find out how little student voice is actually incorporated within IEPs and within evaluations. And so I always incorporate like a strengths-based student interview or before an IEP meeting, especially at the elementary level where student voice is really, really absent. I always try to get the student's voice like in their input to help share with the team. Like actually, when I hung out with the student, they don't really care to work on this one skill, but they really care about getting better at this skill. Can we add a goal about that? And so that's some of the like primary ways that I can think of for like the inclusive eval stage. But yeah, with affirming services and supports, I mean, a lot of it is just really maximizing the student's autonomy, and a lot of it is focused less on changing the student, but educating teachers and case managers. Like I will go into resource rooms, or like I've done trainings specific to ESPs and how to
Yes.
support behavior from a trauma-informed way instead of
Mm-hmm.
from a behaviorist lens. I've done during 30-minute end of school day, I've for all general education staff at elementary schools, I've done like, this is what sensory health looks like. This is how you can make your classroom sensory inclusive for all students. So I like the more tier 1, tier 2 methods is what I really, really aim for, because through that education, it trickles down into really helping to just support the student to be their most authentic selves.
Love that. As you're talking about sensory health for all students, I feel like I've learned a lot from my like teaching the sensory system, or like sharing about it, or like how it works. So much so that I recognize like I have a sensory system too. Like teachers have sensory systems, and if we can't self-regulate, how are we to best teach our students how to regulate? Like that's something that I've been thinking about myself lately, and I've realized like I struggled a lot in my life with anxiety and episodal depression, and I've recognized, number one, I was not getting the sleep that I needed, so I did a sleep study and got a CPAP, and that changed my life. And number two, using a weighted blanket every single night, and when I come home and I need to just like veg out, like I need that weighted blanket. And I learned that from watching our case managers and our students, and figuring out like, when I feel this, I need that. Right. And so that's something when I teach my students in Unified about the sensory system, and sometimes how things can get overwhelming. Like it gets overwhelming for the average person too. Like, and to pay attention to that in your own self. Like, what are some areas that you could that you recognize, like if a smell is too much, like when I feel this, I got to do this about it. When I feel overwhelmed, I need that weighted blanket, because I need stuff for my proprioception system. And weightlifting is proprioceptive. I talk about that. Like I always feel better after I weightlift. And so if it feels like I can get myself in check, like I can be a better teacher for my students, not only because I'm regulated, but also I know how to teach it so that it, so that it can better benefit my students too. So anyway, that to say that when we learn about the sensory system and what we need, it helps us to really put things in perspective for our students too.
So. And when I think about like ableism for adapted PE, I mean, I like to, one question I always like to pose for OTs is like, measuring our students to like neurotypical motor skills. Is that ableist? Like if a student can skip or not, hop on one foot, can they walk on a balance beam for 10 seconds or whatever? Like is, targeting those skills versus like their own goals and comfort and their joy in movement and whatever works for them and whatever participation looks like with, is that inherently ableist? you know.
Yep. Yeah, as you were talking about your like assessment, I feel like I like in a way am kind of on that at secondary level. We don't have really good standardized based assessments. So like when we have new students, I'm like, oh, I gotta find something that will work for them. But also I love using those staff interviews and parent interviews, using the parent interview to be like, what do you guys do at home that brings you joy as a family? We love going for walks in the park. Okay, so how can we work on, or biking or whatever it is? Like I love thinking about like the whole family and community outlook too, because if the student's going to work on something at school, I love having it transfer at home, so then it can be like a family connection thing too, right? But like the standardized assessments, like yes, we need to have something to go off of, and I know there are states that generally have to, state law, have those standardized assessment. But also if a student can move and get sweaty and work out and not have it look like other students, like that's okay, right? That's okay.
I'm wondering if there's like an assessment tool out there, because in OT, like there's been a lot of researchers doing a great job of actually creating tools with neurodivergent people, where they use pictures and stuff, so you can use it with non-speaking individuals or those with like executive functioning differences. And so I'm wondering if there could be like a dream, like what I can think of, like a dream assessment tool for Dave would be if someone, because I think caregiver and teacher reports are great, but for me, I still think student as much as possible is the most ideal way of creating an IEP or creating a goal for a student. So I'm even wondering if like someone could create a tool where you have pictures of a bunch of different movement, school-based activities. They're all photographs, and then the student in a student interview can essentially organize them, whether it's in a basket of like love it or want to get better at it, to like a basket of red where it's like not interested, where they can actually choose what they want to work on.
Yeah, I'm thinking back, I used to do a student interview. Maybe I need to bring that back and just think about the communication pieces, like pictures or written or whatever it is. Like you're making me think.
Like even if you have 12 different activities, photographs, and they are picking one up more than the other, that might give you an idea of, oh, maybe they really are interested in wanting to throw scarves more, or maybe they want to participate in basketball more, So then it really focuses on what the student's interested in, because there's a lot of research out there that caregiver parent goals they deviate or are different than students and disabled children. And so really ensuring that we, take what parents say with a grain of salt. Obviously parents and families know students the best, but we just can't miss that student voice piece.
Yeah, 100%. I have 2 more questions. This is perfect timing. I'm so excited. This is like perfect. But I want to ask you first about like student voices to challenge ableism. Like what are some ways that we can teach our own students to say, we need to think about this differently. We need to challenge ableism. And what are some maybe ways that we can teach our students that?
I always like to just tell students that the way that you experience the world is beautiful and okay. You're going to hear plenty of voices throughout your educational experience that will tell you that the way that you clap your hands or the way that you write or the way that you participate in activity is wrong, but that's so not true. And so a lot of it is just really amplifying and empowering students that they have the autonomy, reminding them that they have autonomy and agency to advocate for these decisions and choices. Because honestly, I've been learning in the school system, like the primary barriers to student success is rarely, if ever, students. Oftentimes it's the adults.
Yeah.
It's the adults.
I feel like we disable our kids more, and we don't even realize we're doing it.
Well, we view students from a deficit-based lens, and and so just really, I like to just try to empower my students and talk about what ableism is. And if they're really young, I don't talk about it exactly like in the form of ableism, but just about honoring their differences and who they are as young human beings. And like advocacy, like people think that advocacy is like big policy change at the Capitol, or it's like a protest, but advocacy is also those 5-minute everyday conversations with teachers. Like if you talking with a teacher about, like for some neurodivergent people, they have motor pattern differences, but that doesn't impact their health. So, and that's beautiful and
Yeah.
that's okay. So how can we help adapt to this one area of like gym that fits
Right.
with like their profile as like a learner? Like that 5-minute conversation could be super powerful for a teacher.
Awesome. 5-minute conversations. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
So the last question I have before we have to start wrapping things up is, I noticed in our conversations in IEP meetings and just our like day-to-day stuff, that you use the word reframing a lot.
Oh,
Even
sure.
reframing it to say, and I feel like this is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a really easy way to like not call things out, but also like a really good way to call things out. You know what I mean? Like, or to rethink, like, how did you land on the word reframing when it comes to like ableism or anything that we need to kind of shift our thinking on?
Yeah. Many of my colleagues and like activist friends use it, use the word reframing. And I think a lot of it initially stemmed from like reframing behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So like there's like the bad behavior iceberg. If listeners have ever heard of it, it's a really great concept of like, you have this iceberg that's in the water and you have like 10% of the iceberg that's above the water. So that's everything that you can see. So that's like the students yelling, their quote unquote aggression, they're swearing, or they're like the observable behaviors. But then like there's the 90% of the iceberg that's underneath the water that you can't see. So it's like,
yeah,
their family members yelled at them that morning, or they are hungry because they haven't eaten, or their sensory systems are dysregulated. There's all these underlying reasons. And there's like the contextual environmental stuff around the iceberg, like the seaweed that we don't even consider. And so the bad behavior iceberg is what really taught me about reframing behavior. And so I just like the concept because it's like when you change the way that you look at things, like the things that you look at change. Like when you see a student differently, you see a different student. And so like change the way that you view behaviors, change the way that you view, like I like to think of it as like glasses. We have like our deficit-based sunglasses on that color our thinking. They color everything that we see in a particular way. So if we take off those glasses, maybe put on some different kinds of glasses that maybe help us to see things with more clarity, more objective clarity, and like more of a strengths-based approach, like the student that we see completely changes too.
Yeah. So. Gosh, this was so good, Bryden. I want to keep talking, but we got to wrap it up. So I am going to come back to our slides here, and I'm going to keep you on because I would like to just talk about the things that I took away from today, but also I want to hear from you too in your takeaways. As you were talking, I wrote down some things in my phone cool. Because I'm like, there's so many good things.
Oh goodness.
Some questions that I'm thinking about that I need to bring back to our profession to talk about ableism was, do our assessment tools, the standardized assessment tools, like when we apply them to students without disabilities, does that make them ableist? And we talked about how it kind of does, because we aren't appreciating, not necessarily, I don't know if that's the word, but just allowing the student to be the student and be their whole authentic self, and thinking about their well-being too. I thought the pieces that we talked about today about the well-being and their whole authentic self was just so good. I loved how we talked about bringing the student voice to the meetings and those 5-minute check-ins. And my brain is thinking like, I need to go back to some of those student interviews, especially, at the high school, at all level, but especially in the getting ready to transition outside. Like, what are you going to do? And what is your favorite things that you want to do? And how can I support that? Right.
Yes.
And that we don't want to change the student. We want to educate the case managers and support their likes, their needs, but in a way that the student has a voice of saying, hey, this is what I want to do. I love the saying that you shared, sensory inclusive of all students, because all students have a sensory system, right? And so when we think about sensory needs, like what is going to be helpful for all students. So I was just thinking about that as you were talking, and just having student autonomy and student advocacy. Those were the 2 A words that keep coming back to me as well. So those were my takeaways. What were your favorite things from today?
I think like this is only my third year being in the school, second year being at Buffalo. Great district, by the way. Love Buffalo.
I love Buffalo.
Never leave the school district for another school district.
Mhm.
We were so lucky.
Yeah.
I think I'm learning more and more of like just the collaboration opportunities. Like as we were talking, like I would love to even, I mean, when I can, because right now it's just busy time of the year. I know it is for you too.
Mhm.
But I love to like collaborate and like help like even like lead an activity in DAPE or like
Yes.
co at something with you.
Yes.
Because I think like DAPE and OT, especially when you focus on like function and like participation from that student-centered lens, like I think we could do some pretty powerful work for students.
I think that would be great.
For sure.
I think let's talk about doing that, like having an activity or like doing something. We've talked about this before that we just like need to do it. But let's actually like sit down and figure this out, because I think it would be really fun. And I think we could really do some good stuff.
I agree.
Yeah. So I want to share about what's coming next to the podcast next month in November. Our November podcast is going to be featuring a parent. And I have not had a parent on the podcast yet, but she is a parent of one of my former students. And I want to share, she is going to share, I'm not going to share, she's going to share her story about her daughter and how movement and physical activity and being social with her friends really changed not only her daughter's view on physical activity, but also went powerfully out in the community and did amazing change for all students. And I'm excited to have you, our listeners, on and hear that story, because I'm telling you right now, I'm gonna need a Kleenex box. I get emotional just thinking about it. So I'm excited to have Tanya Sands on the show talking about her daughter, Aubrey. And I do have permission to share those names. And I talk about Aubrey constantly in my keynotes and in my sessions, because she was a student that really changed my perspective on a lot of things that I was teaching about. But I also want to make sure I thank you, Bryden, for coming on. Also the beautiful graphic that I literally say every time, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. But thank you for coming on and sharing your heart and your passion. This was such a great podcast. So thank you.
It was an honor. Thank you so much, Jen.
Yeah. And then we're also going to thank our listeners for listening. So thank you for jumping on or rewatching if you're rewatching from YouTube. And thank you again to our sponsors, Fit and Fun Playscapes, our 25-26 sponsors. Keep us going for the whole podcast year. You can find us on social media, Heartbeats of Adapted PE on X and at Heartbeats of APE on bluesky.social. And you can always email us at heartbeatsofadaptedpe@gmail.com. Where to watch, you can find us for sure on YouTube. And this event is also happening on the Health and Physical Education Collective as a live event. So you can watch us there and interact with other physical education, health, and adapted PE teachers there. And then this is also picked up on the Shape America YouTube channel, which is our national organization. So if you are logged in to YouTube and you're on Shape America's website or Shape America's YouTube page, you can find us under the live section as well. And I do have a couple of episodes right now on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, but all of our podcasts are on YouTube at this point. And I just want to thank you so much again. And thank you for joining us. And I will see you at our November podcast. Thank you so much.